Welcome everyone to another episode of Women of the Military podcast. I'm bringing Tabitha back to be on the podcast. I looked to see when you were on, and it was episode 95, which is so
Oh,
long ago. I was
jeez.
like, no wonder I know her so well. I've known her forever. So yeah, that was 2020, and I had been following you on LinkedIn for like at least a year before we actually connected. So I've known you quite a while, and I was like, oh, that's why I know her so well. And you were running for state
Senate.
something.
Yeah,
Yeah,
state
state
senate
senate.
in Indiana. Yep.
Yeah, and so we talked about like your military experience, but then also while you were running. And so it's a really good episode. You should go back and listen to it. Obviously, I didn't listen to it, but I didn't know. I was like, state, what am I going to say, Senate? But I remember it being a great conversation, and I learned a lot as, a civilian, not a veteran, just hearing about like you getting involved in politics. So I think it's a great episode to go listen to it. So I'll link to it in the show notes so people can find it easily. And then we're going to talk about mental health because A, it's May and it's Mental Health Awareness Month, and B, because you and I was like thinking before, I was like, I talk about mental health a lot, but I also don't talk a lot about mental health because I kind of tell the same story over and over and don't really get into specifics. But I thought if we had a conversation back and forth about our experiences, that it might bring more people into the conversation so that they can share their story and just get their experience because you and my mental health challenges come from PTSD from my deployment to Afghanistan. And when I was going through the claims process, it was assumed it was an MST. And I was like, no, that's not what it is. And so I just want to talk about like what challenges people face and just the claims process a little bit. But I'll stop talking, let you talk a little bit about who you are, just do a quick introduction and
Yep.
talk a little bit about your mental health challenges.
Yes, of course. And I love this conversation because it is the back and forth and it is I think for females, there's this perception that it is always military sexual trauma. If it's anything mental based, and that's also a trauma that men can't have, which again, I think is that overall stigma when we're talking about that. But for those who don't know me, I am Tab Bartley. I served 8 years in the Marine Corps. I transitioned out of the Marine Corps in 2018 after having injuries, multiple organ prolapse injuries. And those physical injuries and trying to find that really led into, I don't like to say I was suicidal, but I understood how in the transition someone could come to that conclusion. It was like I was fighting all these battles. I was having panic attacks. I was having physical episodes, mental things, all of these things happening that one, didn't understand why they were, and two, I don't think I could rationalize as somebody who wasn't in combat. I didn't think that I had been through something traumatic enough to result in that type of like needing of mental health or having PTSD. And it was once I was diagnosed with it that that's when like the healing was actually able to start and to happen. And so super glad we're having this conversation because I think it's something that a lot of people for so many reasons are uncomfortable talking about or think that there is a perception, because I mean there is somewhat of a perception on it, right? Like we've already said, like they automatically assumed that it was because of sexual trauma for you. So
Yeah. Yeah, and you just triggered something in my memory of like even getting help, like the first step to getting help, because you shared a story before we started. And then I was thinking, oh, even my first step to getting help was really challenging. I did go and get help like right after I came home because I thought there was something wrong. But the person I talked to was like, you're fine. You just got back. Just give it a couple weeks. And so then I had years of self doubt where I was like, she told me I was fine. So obviously, all these like issues that I'm having, they can't be from the deployment because she told me it was fine. And then when I finally got help, it was like, no, she was wrong. She should have got me in mental health. She should have at least been like, oh, you're dealing with stuff. Let's continue this conversation. You're probably going to be fine, but let's keep talking so that you can like work through everything. And that, I guess, is like part of why I had so much trauma from my deployment was because I was in denial of like the things that I was feeling, I was like, "You're fine, just get over it." And so that was something, and I think a lot of people feel like getting help is really scary, and then when you get that kind of, "Oh, you're fine," then you're like, "Oh, good. I don't have to worry about this anymore."
Or it's the, you come back and because you're still active duty and you're doing all these things that you're almost so overwhelmed by just being in that chaotic, always have to do something that you're able to also trick yourself, whether it's your mind or your body, into you physically may be reacting, but you can put that on the stress of the job or, the multiple hours. And I think that's something with our community that is, I think, the bigger challenge. And I think that's why we see maybe the mental health aspects of like the anxiety or the panic attacks so much on the transition and so much more focus there, because all of a sudden, one, you don't have this community anymore, and two, it's almost like you're running so fast that you just see flashes of things, so you kind of acknowledge it but not really, and then the transition just it stops you. And
Right.
on LinkedIn, I feel like we see so many service members who are like, "Yeah, I didn't think my trauma was bad enough," or "I didn't think what I went through was bad enough." And it's like, we have to change that. It's the trauma isn't about what you actually went through, it's how it impacted you. And we're talking specifically with the way it changes your mind. And you can't train yourself on how to rethink. That's why, like, I'm a huge advocate. I got cognitive therapy. I don't know if that's like what you went through, but it helps you retrain your mind how to think because the trauma changed your mind.
Yeah. I mean, I use a lot of meditation and then, like,
Yeah.
tools to help me realize, like, what's triggering me and then bring me back down, and so, like, it's not it wasn't specific cognitive therapy, but that is,
Yeah.
like, what you're doing, like, you're doing meditation, you're catching yourself as you're spinning out of control, and then you're able to ground yourself and be like, "I'm really okay," or "I'm really safe," and able yeah, because that was, like, I would something would trigger it and I would like spin out of control, and I even when I knew like I wasn't in a dangerous place, I couldn't stop reacting, and it took like therapy and then getting those tools of meditation and grounding exercises that those it was like I have the five senses one. I don't know if you've done that where you have to like
Yes.
that one. I'm like one time I was like freaking out, but like I was like the wall is there. You are seeing the wall. And like I couldn't get past see, but I did that for like I don't know how long, but I was like, I see the wall, I feel the wall, and like those were like the only two things I could do, but it helped me ground down and then I didn't spin out of control.
And I think that's the thing for me, like, I think the mental is really a challenge too when you're dealing with, like, physical stuff at the same time, which again tends to be a trend, I would say, in the veteran and the military space, because 9 times out of 10, you probably have, like, a bum knee, a bum hip, whatever other thing. And so for me, when something would trigger my anxiety, it was normally something physical or, like you said, something environmental, but then my heart would race, and then it would be like, "Can I breathe? Wait, is my heart it is my like," and as you were saying, and those abilities to grounding is probably my favorite, because I can't do the breathing work. Somebody like me who has, like, asthma, breathing stuff, it just makes me hyper focus in a bad way. But like you said, like the wall, the thing I can touch. Can I feel just my left pinky toe? Like, the thing that is out there. And I think that it's so scary, or it seems so scary to get to that point, to get that help to be able to do it. Because I don't know about you, but for me, I never would have come to those grounding techniques on my own. Or I would say like the whole, maybe putting it all together of the I don't know how to say it.
Yeah, I mean, without my therapist telling me, like, here are some tools, we did the ABC charts, and then she gave me more tools, and like having all these different tools, it's military tools in your toolbox that you can pull out and figuring out like this one works, this one doesn't, this one helps me in this way, like I can use this one in this type of situation. I think I wouldn't have known that all those things were available. And I also like to talk about like I was in such a dark place for so long that I just thought that was my life. I was like
And
I
so
my
what
eyes adjusted, and I just was like, I can't really see stuff, and I bump into things every once in a while, but that's just my life." And then I got help, and I was like, "Oh, there's a light switch. You can turn it on."
so
So,
what drove you to get that help though? I mean, especially after somebody essentially telling you you're fine. Like, what was that catalyst for you that you finally, like, got the help that you deserved to get?
yeah, so it took me over 6 years to get the help that I needed, and I went because I couldn't I had tried reading books, I had tried just not getting angry. I was like, "I'll just not ever get angry again." For some reason, that didn't work.
Yeah, I'm
And
surprised.
yeah, and I really did it for my kids because I could see how that was affecting them, the way that I would, lose control and, not be a good mom, and I wanted to be better, and my sister really encouraged me to get help because she had gone through her own therapy and told me how many, great things, and so it was really my sister telling me, "No, you need help." You're telling me these things, you need help. Like, so what if she said you're fine? But I did have to trick myself into the first time I got in the car, I didn't go to the meeting. I was like, I'm fine. And then I had a bad week and I was like, you are not allowed to not go to this meeting. You have to go. So I just drove and forced myself to go. And then once I went, it was easy to go back.
And did you get your care through the VA or did you do it outside the
No,
VA?
it was, the church that I was going to had Celebrate Recovery, which is for hurts, hangups, and habits, and, so I went to that every Friday night for multiple years, and then after that, I got counseling through the Cohen Veterans Network,
Mhm.
that is free for post 9/11 veterans, and so those were, my 2 resources.
See, and I think that's helpful because I do think that there's so many people, fairly so, that like feel like the VA has failed them or failed people they know. And I think it's important for people to know that there's not just one route to healing. Look at your churches, look at your community, look at the local things as well. I ended up and funny enough, again, I ended up getting care because my husband. It was like I kept saying, "Oh, I'm fine, I'm fine." Knowing I wasn't, but when it came the moment to ask for more help, I just didn't feel like I was valid enough, right? Like, oh, my troubles can't really be that bad, and so on and so forth. And I was telling you before this, where we're sitting in our PCM meeting, and she's like, "Okay, we've got everything. Is there anything else you need?" And my husband looks at me, and he's looking at her, and I'm looking at him, and I'm looking at her, and he's like, and I don't say anything. He's like, "Yes, we would like mental health counseling, where she's experienced this, this, and this." And the weight of just like, she was like, "Oh, okay, yeah." And I was like, "Oh, that's like that was it. It was that simple." Which, for anybody listening who's tried to get it through the VA, and it's not, I'm not saying that it's always that simple because again, later I tried to get it and I got a provider who, kind of like your experience, really like demeaned me. It was like, "Oh, we're gonna cause panic attacks, so you can live through them." Well, I know I can live through the panic attacks. It's not the issue. I don't want to have to avoid every little thing that makes me anxious, and I
Right.
don't want to be completely stuck when I am in a panic attack to the point of it's like it then becomes such a physical reaction. I don't know if I need to go to the hospital and that it was actually something else. Because for me, that's how severe um and I guess I should probably, so I also get like complex migraines and have now found out years later I have a heart murmur. So it's very likely that my body was also in these panic attacks saying, yes, there are these physical things that are happening. But the issue is because of how much the noise was in my head, I couldn't even actually hear that.
Right.
Um, and so it's, you have to find the people, the providers, or the place that works for you and works kind of for how you heal, because it is not a one size fits all. It is not, and as discouraging as that seems, it is worth, I think, continuing that, finding the right place or the right person or the right method for you.
Yeah. Yeah, I really agree with that, and it's interesting because your body knows things that your mind doesn't, and so, like, it's interesting. For me, it was like my body was, like, trying to tell myself, "There's something wrong, you need to freak out," and, like, and that unresolved trauma was inside of me, but, like, in my mind, I was like, "That's in the past. We put it in a box, so we didn't think about it more," and my body was like, "No, we didn't," and so for you, your body was also like, "There's something wrong," and it didn't know how to, like, and you're like, "No, I'm physically fine, it's not a big deal." So it's interesting how your body, I think that's, like, a lot of, like, what I always thought mental health was mental in your brain, but so much of it is in your body that's trying to, like, come out of you, and then it's coming out in destructive ways. That is where the mental health part comes.
It is, and I think, I think it's interesting. And you filed your claim, right, for the VA, and you did that after
Yes.
you were like diagnosed or starting treatments?
So I hadn't actually been diagnosed with Cohen Veteran Networks. They said that I had
Okay.
unresolved trauma from my deployment, but they said it wasn't PTSD. But then I got
Okay.
a PTSD diagnosis and a nice compensation. So I was like,
Yeah.
it's kind of funny. How, and that's the thing, it's like depending on who you talk to. And I think in that claims appointment, the reason why I got diagnosed with this high rating is because I could specifically say, this event happened in Afghanistan, and this is why I freak out when I'm in traffic. And like, this event happened in Afghanistan, and this is why I react this way in this situation. And I think that's the like hard part is if you don't do the like prep work of figuring out like what your triggers are, when you go in that appointment, they'll be like, they have their set questions, what I did in my appointment was like, "Yes, I did have childhood trauma from this, and this, but this is what is causing." Because one of my I live in LA and traffic's one of my cues. I learned
Mhm.
that getting stuck in really and freaking out, and then I was like, "What happened that makes it so that traffic freaks me out?" And then I remembered a mission we were on, we got stuck in traffic and the high stress, and I was like, "Oh, this is why my body is freaking out when I get stuck, especially when I get boxed in."
Yeah.
And so now I know that's my tool, but I was able to articulate that in the appointment and explain like what I do to get through those situations. And so I think it's more that you have to know like what triggers you, which is really hard to do. It was kind of just like I got in this thing and then I was like, "What happened? Why did I get triggered?" And then I was like, "When did I feel that way before?" And but that took a lot of, like, self-introspection and not knowing that one day I would need that for the VA claim, but yeah.
Right, and I think that's one of the challenges is it's not like the physical exams where it's like, "Oh, well, I've had hip surgery," and then they check your range of motion, and
Right.
they're like, "Yeah, your range of motion should be at, like, 78, and you're at, like, a 2," whatever it is. The mental, it's almost like you do have to do work beforehand to know what your triggers are. Yeah, you may know the incident or have an
Right.
assumption that it was this incident. And like for me, it was, multiple active shooter incidences that were, all around me and then proceedingly closer. And when I was pregnant, after one of these incidences, I started like breaking out in hives and started having anxiety when I'd never had anxiety. All of a sudden, I was struggling doing public speaking. I've never had issues public speaking. And it wasn't until, again, years later of doing the work and the counseling that
Yeah.
it's like, well, this is all tied back to, like, you're so scared of dying. You were so scared of, like, death is chasing you, all of these things, and it's impacting you by you can't ride in an elevator, can't walk across something that's, like, 2 stories high. The intrusive thoughts of picturing death and these death scenes that you can't stop in your mind that then go into, these panics, and I I was doing all this work and was diagnosed with PTSD. And then I filed my claim. But what I didn't know, again, was that I would have to articulate it. And I did in my writing. So I guess I did in the submission of it. But what I didn't know in the meeting that they were going to ask and dig into my childhood so much. And because I had been doing all this work with my counselor and we had talked about my childhood trauma, which was like it was molestation and sexual based and abuse, my counselor was like, well, that's not that's not what we're dealing with. You know, that happened when you were so young, you dealt with the trauma of that and figuring that out at some other point in your life. Not saying that, you know, it didn't have any impact on me and who I was, but that wasn't why I couldn't ride in an elevator
Right,
or do these things that never caused me any fear or just be stuck in these traumatic movies playing in my mind where I couldn't function. And I didn't know that I had the power and control in that to do what you said, where, yes, I am aware there's childhood trauma, but that's not what we're dealing with. We're dealing with this incident that now is having this impact on me.
right,
And that's something that I have a huge issue and would love to one day kind of fight that battle to they should not be asking about childhood trauma at all. Because most of the veterans who are going in for this either have only just started the work or they think it's the first step they have to do the
right,
work because you got to get the diagnosis to get the care to be able to be seen, right? And that's why I went in for it. Was like, well, I want to make sure I can always get mental health care.
right.
Like I like it's debilitating. Like you were saying, it was like there were days that I felt like I was the worst mother in the world and that I was a burden.
Yes,
Like it
yes.
was like I was a
And that's how
burden.
you get in that ideation of suicide.
That
Yeah,
spiral of and I think for me, it was extra hard because that feeling like a burden and feeling like maybe they'd be better without me, but all I wanted to do was live. Literally, my whole trauma was that I did not want to die. Like,
right,
I could how do you then even grasp that? Like, the moment of, like, gosh, they would maybe be better without me. Like, really, like, I'm a burden, but I don't wanna die. Like,
right.
it is such a again, and I think it's one of those things when we're talking about suicide and, you know, it's I don't think it's that often people even want to die. I don't think that it's like this is like, I just wanna die. I feel like it's all of these other things that just build up.
Yeah, for sure. I heard a really good podcast on, the military veteran dad. I don't know if he still has that podcast still out there, but the person he was interviewing was talking about suicidal ideation, and she talked about how it's like a flip. You know, it's like as easy as turning on a light switch. You have this thought, and then all of a sudden you're taking the pills or you have a gun to your head. Like, it's not often that maybe they've thought about it off and on, but when they actually do it, it's like a quick flip, and so often it's like not really something thought through. It's just a moment of desperation and like a call for help in a very negative way, but
Yeah,
that's yeah.
and
Yeah, my friend Oh, go ahead.
no, you go ahead.
Oh, it was like my friend recently stopped showing up to meetings and that from this mom group I'm in, and the first one she missed, she texted me and was like, "I'm not feeling well, I'm not gonna be there." And so I was like, "Whatever." She's not feeling well, that makes sense. The
Yeah.
second one, she didn't send me a message, and I kept looking for her the whole meeting, and I was like, "Where is she?" So I texted her and was like, "Hey, you weren't there. What's going on?" And she's like, "I was tired and da da da." But then the next day she was like, "Actually, I'm really depressed. And I was just trying to see if anyone would notice if I didn't show up." And I was like, and then when she said that, I was like, "Oh, she has been acting strange." And I've just been like so busy in my life. And then I feel like the worst friend, but like that's like we're all struggling and like that was she's like, "This was my cry for help, like, I'm just not gonna be there and no one's gonna notice." And, like, thank goodness that I reached out and was like, "I noticed you weren't there." And then that gave her the confidence to be like, "I'm really struggling with this and I need help." And so I've been trying to be a better friend to check in on her and, like, schedule time to hang out, but, like, for so long she was struggling because I know that she's been struggling since last August, and I just thought, "Oh, she's just a little off," but and then she said
Yeah.
that, and I was like, "Oh." I mean, it was like a big red flag when I was like, "Why isn't she here? She loves being here, and she's not here, and she didn't even tell me she wasn't coming." So, like, yeah.
And I think that shows how, like, it's not even these grand gestures. Because funny enough, like the day that was like I would say my darkest day, I had just gotten off the phone with the VA. And again, it was fighting for like Like, why is women's care specialty care? Why do I have to beg so hard to be seen in all of these things? And, I kind of like, again, put out into the void or put out whatever aura and then posted on Facebook and deleted it within 2 minutes of like how frustrated I was, how overwhelmed I was. And it was like one of my Marines instantly reached out and he was like, "What is going on?" And it was literally like that was like my darkest moment of like, goodness. And I think sometimes we think that these gestures like have to be something big and it's that little thing of, or I noticed you weren't doing this. And like she said, she just wanted to see if like it was just, does anybody even care? Or is this a
Right,
sign or whatever right? Because I think part of the, and again, I don't think because people have anxiety or depression or these things that like they're like mentally unstable. I don't think that those things coincide. I think you can be thriving in life and still be dealing with anxiety,
right.
PTSD. You really can. I feel like I'm one of those people that like from the outside oftentimes it seems, and I think that's why I try to be so transparent with it because yeah, if you wrote things down, it was like, oh, she accomplished this, and it's like great. I also was in the hospital then. I was, this and that. And so, yeah, not to take away from it, but it is almost those like little moments of noticing or not noticing or just like, oh, I haven't talked to somebody in a while. Maybe I should just see how they're doing.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, reaching out is so important and like it's something that we need to I think be better at. We get so busy with our lives, but it is really important and it people notice when you reach out and are like, what's going on? You're not acting normal. This is like a huge red flag." And it was funny because when she was like, "I was just tired," I was like, "Okay, that's fine." And it wasn't until the next morning she's like, "No, this is the truth." And I was like, "Oh, that makes a lot more sense." I shouldn't have been like, "Oh, okay, I'm glad you got the rest you needed." I should have been like, "Are you sure? Because that doesn't make any sense." So,
I do think though, but like what you said, where it was just your reaching out that was enough. I don't feel like it was then your responsibility or your like I also don't think we can put like that on ourselves either
that is true.
because I do I think I feel like that's part of the reason why then some of us don't get help because we're like, oh well, I know that they went through all these things and this and mine wasn't that bad. It's like it can literally just be that simple action and that you didn't have you didn't have to do the further than that or if something happened it's not it doesn't just fall on you it falls on I think kind of like the bigger picture of things.
Yeah, that's true. Give myself grace. I did
Yes.
reach out. I shouldn't yeah, I think that is an unrealistic expectation to be like, "I should have known what was going inside her head." Yeah, that's so
Yes.
true. But it is interesting when you find out like, after I found out, like, oh, my friend was going through postpartum depression, and I was like, "Oh, that explains, like, some of the weird things that you were doing," that I was like, What are you doing? That doesn't make sense." And so but it's weird in the time because you can't, like it's hard for you as the outsider to explain why it's happening.
And I think too, and I wonder if some of that is subconsciously with somebody who has kind of experienced it too yourself. Like I feel like if I was when I was doing those things that even I didn't know why I was doing it, if somebody asked, I'm not sure my reaction would have been anything positive. And I'm not saying I would have jumped down their throat, but I mean like
Right.
I didn't know what the heck was going on. I'm not sure that really would have even helped in the
That's
moment to
true.
have
That's
something
true.
pointed out. Um
I
and
think you have mental health issues. I've been like, "I what are you talking about? I just didn't show up to this meeting because I was tired." "Okay, okay." That's a good point.
Ah, ah. But I mean, there are times like again, I think back to the one where I think I realized that it was something a little more like while I was in, but I was pregnant, and so of course, when you're pregnant or postpartum, everything just gets evolved to, oh,
Right.
it's because you're pregnant, it's because you're postpartum, and the gunny we were about to give a speech, and I'm like shaking and like being real fidgety and weird. She's like, "What are you doing? What's wrong? Like you're never nervous to talk to people." And I kind of like had an epiphany then, like maybe something is wrong. But again, when you're pregnant, the solution is like, oh, you can take Benadryl. That'll calm you down. Not a further assessment of like
Right.
why.
Which
The
I think is
assumption is pregnancy.
Yeah, which I think is why it's so important to talk about mental health and to share, like, your experience because there's, like, the Hollywood version of PTSD, and I don't think that's realistic. I mean, of course, there are some people who have that type of experience, but so many people have, like, this, you know, just things are off. And it's so easy to, like I said, you get in this dark place, you think this is just normal because you're in a dark place and you've been there so long that you're like, this is how the world is and I'm getting by, like I'm successful, I have a family, but then you realize if you reach out and get help that it can get so much better.
So much. And I think too, and I think for me, it was finding that it was more than just focusing on the one thing. Like in the Marine Corps, we have the whole Marine concept. It was really, I think, when I embraced like the whole body, mind, soul, that I really, really feel like I started to, I don't know if healing is the right word, but like I really felt like I started to have control over things and that it wasn't just me avoiding triggers or like instantly combating triggers. It was like, okay, there's things that I can do to help with that. I really looked at what I was eating, what I was putting on my body. Um, for me, I'm really bad in silence. I cannot do silence, but I can pray. If I'm praying, it doesn't feel like a silence to me. It's, because I'm doing an
Right.
action. So like meditation, like that's something that it doesn't work for me because instead my mind is like 20 mile, like I need something to focus on, right? And so I think it's also finding those other things and realizing that there's this connection and like what works for you.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and there's so many tools and resources out there that there is something right for you, but you just have to try this, try that, try a little bit of like sprinkling it together. I mean, just like the ABC forms, which I did not like doing. It was like action, behavior, and then you had to think about like why it happened. But that's what led me to realize like I had my like freak out in the car and I was like, that was really weird. And then I was like my reaction was to freak out, and then I was like, "Why?" And then I was able to and so, like, I thought those charts were really annoying to do when I had to do them every single week during therapy, but I learned how to, like, retrain my mind, like, "Hey, this happened. The behavior was not what I wanted. So, like, why did it happen?" And that's kind of how I was able to make those connections, and that's like you were saying, like, the first step of getting help, I don't think is doing a VA claim. It's getting help, and there's I really for post 9/11 veterans and their families, I really think the Cohen Veteran Network is amazing because you can go in person, you can do it online, and it's free, and that opened the door to therapy because I had looked into therapy earlier, and it was outside the cost of what we could afford, and
Yeah.
finding someone on TRICARE that was covered was like a nightmare, and so it really made it hard to get therapy. And then when I actually had a podcast sponsored by Cohen Veteran Network in the Philadelphia office, and
Hmm.
they were like, "This is how you can get free counseling," and I was like, and it was the perfect time, and like I was going through therapy when they withdraw drew out of Afghanistan, and I was like, this is, like, perfectly what I needed right when I needed it.
And I think too, I think the I think this is where the military needs to make a big change. I think that there should just be an assumption that military service is traumatic. And that mean, you're developing trauma bonds. You're going through things. And although I'm not saying that everybody who serves has PTSD, that's not what I'm saying. I think that though we need to better teach and train our service members on how to actually deal and handle trauma and ABC and how to retrain your brain. Because trauma can live in your body and your mind for years before
Mhm,
you see it large enough to where you feel like, "Oh, there's something I need to do," or like you said, you think that that's just how things are now.
right.
And I think that's something that you wanna talk about making service members more lethal. Well, there's nothing more lethal than your mind being able to operate the way it should, right? And at full capacity. And so that's something I would love to see over the next few years, that being, and I think that with how vocal our community is starting to be with this, and especially I think like our generation of veterans and really challenging the perceptions of it, I do think that we can help drive that. And I think we need to do, this is kind of like for, the veteran community, we need to, that's what we need to be advocating for. Those are one of the things that should be a constant conversation in, well, how can our military be more lethal? Well, we can address mental health from the get-go. And that it's not this weird, I mean, it should be no different than needing physical therapy for an injury,
Right.
or doing these preventative, strength training because you're going to rock with a pack on. And so you need to build muscle and you need to lift weights and you need to do this type of stuff. I think once we get there and we're doing that for our service members, that's when we can say we're actually like fully lethal. Until then, I don't think that we can say we're as lethal as we want to be when we're having such big impacts, when there are tools out there that we could be using and we should be using.
Yeah. Just like talking about like transition, like you have all this stuff. Like I remember going to the Joint Women's Leadership Symposium, which is supposed to be focused on, military women coming together, but it's also supposed to be focused on like transition. And I was one of the few veterans who was at the event, and nobody wanted to talk to me about transition or like what comes next. They were all talking, they were so focused on all the crap, not crap, all the stuff they were doing. It felt like when I was like, "That's not what you should be focusing on." Like, if you're transitioning, you don't need to ask questions about like the whatever the military code is on this and that. You need to start focusing on yourself and your transition, and not about like the things back at work that you're trying to get outside help from. And so that was really interesting to me because I was there to be a resource and people didn't ask me any questions. And I was like, I'm here. I have so much information, but and I'm in July we're going to focus on transition, and I've interviewed Teresa Carpenter, and she and I were talking, and it was like even though she's transitioning, she still has that like it's like you can't actually totally prepare. It was really interesting. She's so prepared. She has so much information, and so there's still that like missing piece of like when you actually take your uniform off. And so that was really interesting to hear that too. And so that's
Eh,
why like the mental health.
yeah, and I think this was something that we had talked about too during that the one that we had did, where we had talked about that, and it was like you shouldn't be so scared of preparing people for transitions. That's, I think, going to retain them longer. I think the
Right.
more we prepare, and this is again, let's look more holistically. We are going to have so many transitions in our lives. So many. Is it okay, first time being pregnant, entering, a child in the home, a second child, transition out of the military, um, the first job out of the military, the second job out of the military. Like, life is about transition. So if we're better preparing our service members on how to transition and we're doing it holistically, where again, I think mental is one of the mental and the emotional of it, because that's something that's also not talked about. Like, it's emotional. And again, I'm somebody who, I live in kind of I joke about it, but kind of I'm kind of an unemotional person quite often. I just like, and it's not saying I'm not joyful or these things. It's just I tend to kind of be in this, like, I don't allow emotions very often to kind of like penetrate me. I'm very like, man, when it comes to that. You don't have an option when you're transitioning and all of these things are happening, and you
Right.
then lose your community as well. Because again, I'm somebody who, I word vomit. I have things in my head, I just want to say them and get them out. Not saying I believe it, not saying any of these things, but I need to get it out. And it's lonely. The transition is so lonely. And I feel like a big part of mental health feels lonely too. Because it
Oh
feels like
yeah.
we can't talk about it. It feels like there's these perceptions and these preconceived notions. And at least for me, I didn't feel lonely in the Marine Corps. I had great friends. I had great, like, people around me, or maybe it's just because 'cause I'm a Marine and Marines are all like, "Oh, Marines," you know?
No, I mean,
Rob.
even in the Air Force, I didn't ever feel lonely until I left and
Right?
I was a military spouse. And even today, like, Teresa's like, "How do you not be lonely when you get out of the military?" I was like, "I don't know, cause 'cause I'm lonely still." Like, I have my, like, peaks and valleys where sometimes I am, like, really busy and have lots of stuff with friends, and then other times, like, I'm home alone and don't leave the house because I don't have to, but then I'm also lonely, and so, yeah, but I remember, yeah, active duty, you always had people you could hang out with. There was always a group that you could be with, and I mean, especially deployed, you had, like, the people who were there and they yeah, so when you leave the military, I feel like for me, I felt like I didn't transition the right way because I didn't get a job, and so then I felt like I did it wrong, and so, like, then I was blaming myself for how I was transitioning, and I feel like nobody can do it right, and so there's this, like, I can't even talk about it because I the reason I'm struggling must be because I did it wrong instead of it's like, "No, it's emotional, there are challenges, and, like, we do need to talk about it, and so that's why I wanted to talk to Teresa about it, and also why I wanna talk about mental health because we need to talk about it because it's something that people are experiencing and feel so alone, and if we can bring these conversations to light, it can really help.
And I have been surprised with I how much I have shared my story, how helpful that is. And it's almost like every time I expect there to be a lot of negative, I mean, there's always like 1 or 2 comments, but for the majority, it's positive. Or it's
Mhm.
even like months later when I randomly post my phone number and I'm like, I'm taking phone calls and somebody calls me and they're like, we've never interacted, but I've read all your stuff and like I've shared my stuff with my child who is suffering from this and I just want to say how much you've helped us. And I'm just like, what? Like my little like LinkedIn post of that's like my it's honestly LinkedIn is like my journaling of I'm just like again, it's not always great, okay? But I'm getting things out there and it's just like I didn't expect that. And I think that's part of the fear and the mental health. And I've just noticed I feel like the more we share, I've only seen it positive for me, or more positive
Yeah.
than negative, I should say.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, the more that I tell my story, the more that I interact with other people, the more that I have confidence to continue sharing, and then you get stories like that where you're like, "You said this," and you're like, "I said what? It happened
Yeah.
to you?" And then it's just yeah, and it helps people, and so that's I mean, that's what's so important. So, is there anything else that you wanted to touch on before we wrap up this interview? I think it's been a great conversation, and I'm so glad we did it. So,
I do too, and I am. I think we've already touched on it, but I think just the reminder of like one, your story matters. Telling it gives you the power, gives you the control over it. I think that's one of the challenges or one of the reasons maybe for not seeking mental health is it feels like if you say you experienced a certain incident, then that's the only perception. But you have the power to control your story, even in that space, and that it is it is this whole person or this holistic concept and there's all of these things that you can look at to try that are all different and I think that they're worth trying until you find something that works for you and as I think that's similar to both of our stories if you can't ask for help find somebody who will ask for the help for you right like you don't even have to be the one to ask for help find somebody who will do that for you it'll result in the same thing right.
yeah. Yeah, and know that getting help is scary and taking that first step is scary. So, have I mean, you could send a message to me or Tabitha on LinkedIn and be like, "I need to get help. I'm gonna make the appointment and like we can help hold you accountable because it is really hard. It is so scary. I think the hardest thing I've ever done, not go to Afghanistan, was to go and get help because I was so afraid at what the response would be, especially after going to try and get help and being rejected. So, like, if you're afraid of getting help, know that that's normal. And I wish it wasn't, but it is. And we're here to support you. And thanks everyone for watching. Thanks for being a guest and being so open. And make sure you go follow Tabitha on LinkedIn. I'll put her comment, her comment, her her link to LinkedIn. I'm like, I don't know what I'm saying. I'll put it in the show notes so people can connect with her. And just thank you so much for this interview. I'm so excited we got to do it.
Thank you. I love the conversation. It was great.